And it's in figures because this is a data report. Shuparno, you can see the cover?
Yeah, we can.
So this is a report which is data. And we use data every year to map the trends that are happening in the area of environment, in the area of development. And we believe these are very important because data is the way to measure change. And when you measure change, you can really understand what is going wrong and what needs to be done. And that is why the State of India's Environment Report 2022, which is in a sense a compendium to our main report, which we publish every year, which is the State of India's Environment, which is a narrative report. This is a report which puts the same stories together in numbers. So you are hearing the stories not in words, but in numbers. And as Shuparno said, I am in Stockholm. I'm here to attend the Stockholm Plus 50 meeting. As all of you know, 1972 was the first global meeting where the world came together to recognize that environment is a central issue in our world, and that we need to act urgently to be able to address the problems of then, which were toxification, garbage, pollution, and countries needed to come together. Today, when I and the world comes together in Stockholm 50, we basically have a 50-year track record to look back upon. And the biggest change that has happened is that the world today is no longer talking about an individual country. We're talking about interdependence. We're talking about how the impact of one country actions impinge on another country. But we are also need to look back to understand how we are not getting this right. And the State of India's Environment Report, in its detailed chapter on Stockholm 50, tells us all the indicators that should remind us that the world is definitely off track, that we need to do much more to be able to deal with the planetary challenges that we have today, the issue of climate change, the issue of water scarcity, the issue of air pollution in our cities, and that this will require transformative action. It will require us to do things differently. And I think that's the real message from today, is that business as usual will not work, that we will have to act very differently going forward if we want to fix and change the trend of these indicators. Every year when we put this together, we desperately look for trends that we can show you are actually reversing the change, the decline, that they're getting better, that the world is getting better. We would like to say that to you. We work in the field of environment. For us, it is very important to show that things are improving. Yet we know at the scale at which this is happening, that we are not being able to see the change that needs to happen. And that points us to a very important time, a milestone in the world, which tells us that this is the time for us not just to reflect on what is going wrong, but to reflect on what we need to do going forward. So Stockholm Plus 50, this year, 2022, 2 years after COVID, backbreaking COVID, which is added to poverty, marginalization, inequality in the world, along with the growing threat of climate change. The fact is we are dealing with an existential threat. Those two combined should make us sit up and say, this is not the way we move ahead. That this has to be a milestone year when we do things differently, which means we act for transformational action. And we keep in mind that if there is inequality in the world, we can never have sustainability. And those two lessons have to drive us towards business as unusual, not business usual. Thank you very much. And thank you, Kiran and Rajit, for this amazing work that you have done. This is really important. And I hope that as we share it with all our friends, that you will find this useful and interesting. Somebody is asking me what are transformational actions. I just want to say we talk about this in every one of our meetings. We talk about the need for mobility transformation so that so that we can move people, not cars. We talk about it when it comes to energy transformation. We talk about it when it comes to our cities. We talk about it when it comes to our water and waste management. So there are many areas where we can and must act. But the bottom line is incremental change will not work. We need transformational action. So I hope you will find this report useful. Please use it. Please disseminate it. We really want a better understanding of the trends and therefore an understanding of how we move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sunita ji. You do have a little time to stay on, or?
No, Shubhanu, the meeting has started and I have to rush,
yeah,
and they will lock the doors behind us.
So
right. Please forgive me.
We do understand.
I wanted to join and just share some thoughts, and also thank you all of you for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And we will now continue. Let me now request Kiran. And after Kiran, Rajit is there. They have an interesting combo of presentations where they're looking at this entire report from the perspective of climate change. And on one hand, how human activity basically leads to, and how human activity is connected to climate change. And on the other hand, how climate change impacts us. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kiran. That is what you're on the mute. Kiran. You're on mute. Yeah. So let us now, so go to Kiran Pandey, Program Director, ERU in CSE. Kiran, your feet, please.
Hello, everyone, and thanks, Shubhanu, for this opportunity.
Kiran, you'll have to come a little closer to the mic, I think, because, yeah.
Am I audible now?
Yeah,
better.
Clear. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. So, we're pleased to inform you that this is not the first report that we are publishing. This is the 7th edition, and it's a long way that we have come so far, and we're very, very proud of this. So, what's unique about the 7th edition that we have published? Now, in terms of the depth of the report, if I compare this report with the past report that we have published so far, this report is actually a deep dive into the state of Indian states. Okay, it gives you data that's granular to the level of districts, as you can see from my presentation. So this book has got 17 chapters. Each chapter talks about distinct challenge that the country is facing. Now, within each of the chapters, you will find that we have made a special effort to deep dive into the regional state of the environment. For example, you may have a fact sheet that talks about state of rivers, and within that, we talk about the specific stretch of the river that is of concern to all of us. Within the chapter of land degradation, we talk about districts which are getting affected by this. Again, in terms of fact sheets on soil health, we again talk about, so every fact sheet that you'll see in this report is actually a deep dive as compared to the past report that we have published so far. So that's a unique aspect of this 7th edition of the report. And now, another interesting part that I have felt in this report is the cities that we have captured. Interestingly, we have come across a government report that has assessed cities, but we have gone a step ahead. We have analyzed those the government figures and have a new perspective on the cities. So I think we have gone deeper into the cities and districts through this report. Next. Now, so in the next series of slides, what I'll show you is this book talks about two major challenges. One is the larger picture is that climate is, and it's affecting all of us. There's no doubt in that. In fact, this year, IPCC published 3 such reports. The global report has already acknowledged that the climate is the biggest threat and we need to adapt. And now this report that CSC has published again is evidence. It proves that yes, it is a bigger challenge for the country and for the world as well. So in the next few slides, I'll take you across to 10 major impacts that climate is having on all of us. And the report shows that through the facts and numbers. Okay? Now, also over the next 10 years, you'll realize that besides environment, that is the biggest challenge to the world and to the country, climate is undoubtedly the biggest crisis that all of us will face. How will that affect us? It will also affect your biodiversity and the natural resources. Okay? And if you don't address these challenges, the problem will still worsen. So the first impact, this is a known fact now, everybody is supposed to be aware of this challenge that the country is right now facing, heat waves. India has definitely become hotter in 2022. In fact, 21 was the year when we had the 5th warmest year. But in this year, the difference is the month of March. March is the hottest March that the country has had so far. Why is this? It's because heat waves have arrived a bit earlier. March is not the month where the country should have had heat waves at this scale, at the scale of extremity, but the country had it and it prolonged till May, which means the country had 280 heat wave days between March and May. And this is the highest in the decade. In fact, if you go back, the trends clearly show that this is twice of what the country had experienced in 2012 and the second highest heat wave year in the past decade. So 2012 was the year when we had the second highest heat wave in the decade. So what does that translate into? If the country is becoming warmer, what does that mean? It means temperature is rising and that is having effect on the climate. As a result of that, the country is definitely facing the threat of extreme weather events and they are on the rise. This year, in 2021, around 1,700 people died due to extreme weather events. 1,700 people died due to weather events. This is not less. Why I'm saying this is because if you go by the target that the country had set up for itself on SDGs, the country should not have deaths due to weather events, but people are dying. And what is even worrying is there are more deaths due to lightning, and lightning is a disaster that can be avoided. The deaths could be avoided due to lightning, but people are dying due to these events, and that's of concern to all of us. And if you compare these figures with the last year's report that we had published, you'll see that the numbers have increased this year. And why I'm repeating this is because even as I'm talking about this, Assam had faced severe floods in the country. And so this is not, I think everybody is aware of this challenge and we need to be prepared to deal with this challenge. Okay. Besides this, the rise in temperature is also affecting our glaciers. In fact, the glaciers in China, India, Nepal is a danger to at least 7 Indian states, and the fact sheet puts that out in front of you. This is a very powerful fact sheet, and this prepares you for the years, for the threats that lie ahead. And again, why I'm saying this is because science has been saying this repeatedly, and the numbers are clearly showing the trend. In fact, there are instances across the world also where people are fighting and coming on the forefront against the impact of glaciers. So this is, I think, one of the major challenge that we have to be prepared in the years to come. Climate change also has an impact on our coasts. As you can see from this fact sheet that we have in the report, more than a third of India's coastline is now eroding. It has already eroded between 1990 and 2018. And West Bengal is the worst hit state as per the report. But why is this happening? Reasons is again linked to climate change. The frequency of cyclones has increased, linked to climate change. Sea level rise is another challenge that the country is facing, and there's many evidences that show that very clearly. And so you can clearly see the impact that is affecting our coast, and they're getting eroded. At the same time, there are many activities that are happening around alongside the coast, which is again leading to the erosion of the coastal. For example, beach mining, building of dams. These are all factors that are linked to the eroding coast in the country. This is another severe human impact of climate that needs to be clearly acknowledged. And this is because the world, all of you are aware of the war in Ukraine. So displacement is not a new topic for all of us, but it is worrying to find that by the end of 2020, displacement that took place across 42 countries, when you analyze the numbers, you will find that climate was a bigger problem than conflicts in terms of displacement. And in India, was the fourth worst hit by disasters, where people were displaced due to climate change and its impacts. So this is again a worrying factor. In fact, which means conflicts and climate change, they are emerging challenges for the world, but climate will still supersede in the years to come. That cannot be ignored any longer now. We have to be prepared for that. Besides this, the report also talks about another aspect of climate change that is not in this presentation, but it's also leading to human trafficking in the country. And we have put out a fact sheet on human trafficking at the level of districts in the report. So please take a look at that to understand how climate impacts human trafficking as well. Another important aspect of climate change is affecting our natural resources and land. So very critical for the food security of the country. It's getting degraded. There have been efforts to address this, and our report shows that in some states, they have been able to arrest it. But despite that, you'll realize that 30% of the country is under degradation. And once again, this is also linked to climate change. And along with this, of course, human-led factors. If you go deep dive into these numbers are still worrying. 13 states have 30% of the land under degradation. And within these states, you'll realize Jharkhand is at the top. If you further see the fact sheet, it's not listed over here, but I would urge you to take a look at the section on Northeast that we have highlighted in the fact sheet. Northeast is the area that has to be taken into account across all these challenges, and the report shows very clearly. Another striking number that we should take a note of it is in 9 states account for 80% of the degraded land. But there's also a glimmer of hope, just not in the fact sheet, but just to add on to this, the Rajasthan that accounts for 22% of the degraded land in the country has shown some sense of restoration as well. In fact, the global conference on desertification, which just concluded recently, made a point that as land is getting degraded, there is still hope through restoration. Therefore, I think we should also think about how do we restore these lands, and there are examples in the state of Rajasthan that Down to Earth has been reporting about. Another challenge of climate change that is, again, I think it's a known fact, is that climate is affecting our farmers. And the report shows that very, very clearly. But what is even worrying is that it has become unviable for the farmers in the country. Income from agriculture has declined this year. So if you compare the trends, you realize that in the past, in 2013, farmers used to earn most of the money from the crop production. But as per the recent numbers, the income source is the wages that they have earned as laborers on the fields. And of course, farming will become unviable. That's the trend that the numbers show. And this has to change. Besides this, as it has become inviable, income has declined. We also realize that the cost of cultivation become very challenging for the farmers. If you compare the numbers, you'll find that on an average, if you see the monthly cost of cultivation, there has been an increase by 35% in the cost of cultivation between 2013 and the year 2018 to 19. That's really worrying. In the past, farmers used to spend around 2,192 rupees in cultivation, but it has gone up to 2,959 rupees, and that has to be accounted for. And we need to address these challenges. Even as the country has a target of doubling farmers' income, I think these numbers are really worrying. Air pollution, it's also linked to climate change. But the good news is, if we are able to address air pollution as per the WHO guidelines, there is hope we will live more. If you are an Indian, you live at least close to 6 years more if you are able to clean your air. That's the biggest. We should all try to move towards that direction. And the good thing is, if you are able to address climate and air pollution together, there are more benefits to the world. Some more challenges that the report flags is how climate will affect our forest resources. At the current, if we go by the current trends, the report based on the numbers put out by the Forest Survey of India, it shows that almost the entire forest cover of the country will become vulnerable to climate changes by 2050. And that's an alarming signal that the report flags out very clearly. And if you see, the report also gives you state-wise insights on which state will be affected the most and become most vulnerable to climate changes. So you can take a look at that in the fact sheet. So just to tell you something, that whenever we come out with this report, we always want to talk about climate change, but we always feel that, well, this year it will be better. But every year, since the last 7 years that we have been working on the report, the challenge is becoming severe and severer. And this year was no different from the last year. And what's even worrying is all the global projections and the scientific studies that have been released this year are showing that the trend will increase with the climate change it's because of the business as usual scenario. And this is, we have to take a notice of this trends, because extreme events will increase as the world warms. So what does this translate for all of us? The world will have to feed 10 billion on planning for better cities. We need to focus on better food systems which are sustainable. In short, climate change is undoubtedly a reality, and there's a need to adapt, there's a need to mitigate, and that's the bigger message that the report puts out in front of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kiran. Let me now go to Rajit, who's going to look at it from another aspect, as I understand. Rajit, your field, and then we can take some questions.
Yes, Shupon. I'll just share my screen.
Yeah, sure.
Shupon, how much time do I have? Do we have a Q&A session post this?
No, you have time. You have.
Just one second. Is my screen visible to everyone?
Yes, Rajit.
Yeah, I'm also audible, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, everyone, for joining us today. It's a weekday and it's right in the middle of the day. So thanks a lot for showing the commitment and also the interest in this book. So I'll just take forward from where Kiran left. So basically, Kiran talked about the impact on our lives due to a deteriorating climate or environment. I'll just take it forward and I'll try to again look at it from the different perspective of what are our actions and how they are impacting the climate. So obviously what we are talking about over here is not exhaustive. These are individual fact sheets that have been taken into the book. And another thing that I wanted to clarify over here is that the one thing that we are very deliberate about is bulk of our raw data is sourced from government sources or at best, we go to other credible sources like the UN, FAO, and other places. So the raw data that we've used to look at these trends are either sourced from the government directly, or like the climate change data set that forest and climate change data set that Kiran talked about right now. It has been taken directly from the government, the Forest Survey of India. So we use either government data sets, or we use other credible sources like the UN or some other NGO which has been working on this field. And some of it is also our own analysis at Center for Science and Environment. So from that, I'll just take it forward. So the first and the most important thing, this is again an extension of what Kiran talked about, is that climate change or climate action failure is the most severe global risk that is there even right now and also for the next 10 years. So globally, this is an issue that governments world over and people world over have failed to act despite knowing the fact that things are getting worse. So climate action failure, they say, is one of the biggest threat, not only in terms of our lives, but also in terms of
Rajit, your net seems to be a little patchy.
So, development. Okay, is it better, Shupono, right?
Yeah, it's we lost a little bit of what you were saying just now. Can you repeat that, please?
Okay. So I'll just globally climate action failure, which is basically how governments have failed to act on the climate crisis, or how a lot of governments have also till very recently believed that climate change is not real, or propagated that idea. Similarly, in how individuals have failed to act despite knowing the fact that climate change is happening. So that, they say, is one of the biggest global risk right now, 5 years down the line, and even 10 or 15 years down the line as well. So we tried to look at it from the perspective of India, and we looked at it from the perspective of the Sustainable Development Goals. So SDG 13 talks about climate action. So we looked at India's performance in climate action. So for this, we used Niti Aayog's report on SDGs. And what we looked at is the report that talked about 2019, that is the previous year's report. Over here, SDG's performance, India's performance as a whole in SDG 13 was much better than what it is right now in 2020. In fact, we realized that 28 states, SDG 13, which talks about climate action, the performance actually dipped. The reason why I'm using the word performance over here is because they use a ranking system and a score system. So basically, the scores have actually gone down over there. So this over here in the slide, you can see that this is basically what the global risks look like. So in 5 to 10 years, it is climate action failure is the biggest risk, and then subsequently extreme weather and biodiversity loss. So the first problem is the failure to act. So that is the biggest crisis that we are, or the biggest crime that we are committing right now at individual level, and also more importantly at the national level and international level as well. The second problem to climate from us humans is the fact that population growth and the resultant unplanned urbanization. So if you look at it, so the projected population growth is there on the left. So they say roughly around 10 billion people it would be the population by 2050 globally. And the problem with population is that the direct impact is that the natural resources are getting depleted. The indirect is the way we are also expanding. So the way our cities are coming up is also extremely unsustainable. So these numbers are global numbers over here that we have looked at. So we have to be very deliberate about this. Basically, one of the numbers that we came upon is the fact that by 2050, we would need to produce at least 50% more food than what we are doing right now. We as the world in total. So for our existing agriculture or farming sector to be able to produce 50% more, it will become extremely unsustainable. So that is another thing that we have to be very deliberate about. The other thing that we are doing is we are rapidly destroying the biodiversity. Between 1970 and 2016, so this is all of these fact sheets, the previous one and this one. These are part of our Stockholm 50 plus 50 analysis that we've done. So we've looked at what was the situation in 1970s when the Stockholm conference took place. What is this situation right now? And what is the projected situation by 2050 or 2100, which is basically another 50 or 100 years from where we are sitting right now. So over here, we looked at biodiversity loss. So what we found was that there has been, on an average, 68% reduction in the population size of mammals, birds, amphibians, reptiles, and fish between 1970 and 2016. So this basically shows that at an unprecedented rate, we are basically destroying the biodiversity around us. This is a global figure. This is not an India figure. The other thing that we have also looked at is the rate at which we are emitting greenhouse gases. So this is basically a clear-cut example of how climate action has not happened the way it should, and the climate inaction. So the nationally determined contributions of different countries, this is basically what all the individual countries have pledged to reduce in terms of their emissions. So even if all the countries world over actually meet that, the world is likely to be warmer than 1.5 degrees by the end of the century than what it was in the pre-industrial era. So 1.5 degrees Celsius is basically a threshold beyond which, if the world becomes warmer, then everything goes topsy-turvy. Everything that we think is normal in our lives right now would actually go really awry. So in terms of, glaciers would start to melt quicker, biodiversity loss would happen. The fish that we have in our oceans, they will start moving and migrating to different places because the temperatures are changing. So 1.5 degree and beyond that is really scary. So it also says that, so the first is the NDCs, basically, which are pledges that individual countries have said that we will do this. Now, the second part is existing policies of different countries world over. If they meet or they continue with that, and they do not go, so that is even less ambitious than the pledges that they made. So if they do that, it will be close to 2 degrees. That is really, really bad. So that is another thing that we're doing. So it basically shows that governments are not serious enough. Now we'll talk about the different aspects of pollution that we are doing because of the individuals, that the lifestyles that we lead right now. So what we found was, and this is an India-specific slide that we have over here. So we looked at, this is a CPCB, this is Central Water Commission's numbers. So what they did was, between 2018 and 2020, they had monitored some 688 river water quality stations for different rivers across the country. And what they found was 74% of them were contaminated with some form of heavy toxic metal. So 74% of the samples had some form of contamination. So when you look at it from the state-wise snapshot of this entire thing, you look at it and you find that in Gujarat, in Haryana, in Manipur, and in Tripura, all the river stretches that they have, so they've looked at river and the tributaries and those small nalas that actually feed into them. So all the samples, all the samples had toxic levels of heavy metals, or toxic metals were found in high traces. There were high traces of that. That basically means that these rivers are unusable, and anthropogenic, or our lifestyle, is one of the major reasons for it. So if you look at over here, these are basically in the bottom, this is the state-wise analysis. So the blue shows how many river monitoring stations are there. The orange shows how many stations were actually monitored between this period by CWC. And the last one shows how many were actually found to be contaminated. So Odisha also has very high numbers. West Bengal has very high numbers. So out of the 39 stations that were monitored, 35 had high levels of toxic metals. The other aspect that we looked at when we were looking at river pollution was also the total coliform and the BOD levels that exist over there in river stretches. So over there, we found that 40% of the stations had high levels of total coliform, which is basically fecal matter. And the second is 15% of them had high levels of BOD, biochemical oxygen demand levels. So which basically shows that poor wastewater treatment is happening. So what basically that means is that wastewater from our houses, from different industries, all of them are actually being dumped into the rivers without any form of treatment. So that is usually the reason why these are so high in numbers. We move on to the next point that we've looked at in the book. We've looked at soil contamination that is happening. So after rivers, we looked at soil contamination. So over here, we looked at the soil health card scheme. Under that, the government had looked at samples of 30 million soil samples from across India between 2017 and 2018-19. This is the most recent number that is available right now. And there is widespread macro and micronutrient deficiencies over there. This is one of the maps that is there. So we've got maps for each of the different macro and micro nutrient deficiencies that are happening in India. And this is the district level map that we have. So I'll just quickly take you through. So this is the nitrogen deficiency. So NPK, that is basically the fertilizer. That fertilizer is used. So nitrogen, 96% of these 30 million soil samples, nitrogen was found to be deficient. So if you look at it, the color grading over here, so nitrogen, so the color grading basically shows, the blue shows that in these districts, 25% of the soil samples had high levels of nitrogen. And then as we move on, the dark red basically shows 75% or more of the soil samples collected from these districts had high levels of nitrogen. So an extension of this is, so when you think of it in terms of the fact that we need to feed more people in the future, and the performance or the productivity of our soil is going down. So this has a direct impact on the yield and on farming and farm agriculture as a sector. So on the one hand, it is the land is becoming less fertile. On the other hand, the demand for more food is happening. So what we have seen in the past many years is the fact that then we look for shortcuts. So we look for at unsustainable ways of development. So that is something that we have to be very deliberate about. So from there on, we move on to the next one, which is basically about forest cover. So forest cover is also very interesting. So Kiran talked about one aspect of it. We are looking at the other aspect of it. So forest cover, when you look at it, the big number is obviously that India's forest cover has actually increased from 2017 to 2021. So the total forest cover has gone up. However, look very closely, you realize that there are three kinds of forests: open forest category, then there is something called a moderate category, and then there is the forest. So there are three categories. The forest category also includes commercial plantations. So what has happened is the open forest category is going up substantially, whereas the moderately dense forest is coming down. So basically the quality of our forest is going down, even though in absolute sense, the forest cover is going up. And obviously the densely forest is something that is untapped because people don't stay near it. So, but that I think roughly accounts for 3% of the total forest cover in India. So that has stagnated. The moderately dense forest is going down, and the open forest category is going up predominant. And this category also includes commercial plantations. The other analysis that we looked at, this is basically the map is based on that, is again a district analysis, a district level analysis of the same. So we found out that out of the 638 districts where forest cover exists in India, 244 of them, the forest cover was actually shrinking. And these 244 districts, so they in total, they account for around 46% of the Indian forest cover. So that is something that we also found out. So these red dots that you see, these are the places where the forest cover is going down. And if you look at it, you can actually see the areas in Rajasthan, then you've got something in some bits in central India. So you can look at the broad trend by looking at these district level maps as well. We'll move on to the next one. This is a very interesting fact sheet that Kiran and I, we were able to chance upon. So we were trying to see two aspects. One was how much of the population worldwide and in India can afford a healthy diet, which is nutritious enough. And we also looked at the impact on the environment for having an unsustainable food system, basically how we are growing and all. So what we found out was very interesting. So if you look at it on the left, I don't know whether you'll be able to see it on the screen because it's very minutely given. So this is, we found out that in India, the Indian diet, so the one headline figure that we found was the fact that around 71% of Indians cannot afford a healthy diet. So the assumption over here is the fact that if an individual is spending more than 63% of his income on getting a healthy diet, that basically means it's an unsustainable way of going about in the long run. So they cannot afford a healthy diet for an entire year. So we realized that 71% of Indian population cannot afford a healthy diet, which basically means not a nutritious diet. The global average, I think, was around 40%. So if you look at it, the infograph on the left hand side, it basically breaks down into the individual units. So basically the first one talks about fruit, the vegetables, legumes, nuts. These are the individual components that go into making a nutritious diet. Fish, whole grains, dairy, and red meat. So if you look at it on the, we'll just talk about the fruit option over here. So ideally, the gray on the right, this is basically where it should be if Indians are eating enough. But where India stands is over here, 35.8 grams or 18% of the target. So Indians on an average are eating only 18% of the amount of fruits that they should eat on a regular basis. We are good enough. We are very close to the target for whole grains, but we are off for most of the others except for red meat. So that is basically alarming. So if we talk about vegetables, on an average Indian is only eating 56% of the leafy green vegetables they should consume if they want to have a healthy diet. So that is another very interesting point that we were able to find out. So one is the impact on us in terms of whether we can afford healthy diet or not. The other was what is the impact of a unsustainable food system on the environment. So in this graph, we look at it. So there's a concept called planetary boundaries. Planetary boundaries is basically, they say, a threshold beyond which if we stretch our production, then it will be irreversible. So if we basically use our land a little too much and it becomes extremely degraded, we will not be able to revive or restore it eventually. So that is basically called the planetary boundary. So in terms of percentages, if we look at it, this is an India specific numbers that we have over here. So India is already crossed the planetary boundaries in terms of nitrogen application in farm sector. That basically means that we are using it excessively. We are also exceeded our cropland use. That basically means the available amount of cropland that we have or that can be put into farming for a sustainable farm system. We have basically crossed, we are beyond 100%, and in nitrogen application, we are uncomfortably, excessively beyond 100%. For phosphorus application, we are also inching towards it. And for greenhouse gas emissions from the farm sector, there is also, we are also moving towards it. We are just below 80%. So this basically shows what kind of an impact our farming system has on the environment. And in these two parameters, cropland use and nitrogen application, as we stand today, we have basically exceeded the permissible levels in a sense. Then we looked at also the urbanization and the rapid urbanization, which basically was one of the reasons we realized for one of the very key ways in which we are destroying the environment around us. So what we did over here is, so Niti Aayog comes out with an urban index. So it has a lot of different indicators based on the SDGs. We have picked up 14 key indicators out of that, which we thought were very important to understand what kind of environmental impact the cities have. And so these are basically socioeconomic indicators that we've looked at. So on the basis of that, we have looked at the 56 million plus cities and also capital cities. So million plus cities is, I think, around 40, 41. And then we've got these capital cities, which have got less than million population. We have also clubbed them. So in total, we've looked at 56 different cities across India. And what we found, so there are 14 indicators over here. I am just going through just two of them. One is the use of clean fuel. So, and you have to understand the fact that we are talking about urban cities. Basically, this is the best that we have. So even over there, we've realized that 14 of these 56 cities, the most developed areas in the country, over there, 20% of the households continue to use unclean fuel for cooking. And out of those, 7 are capital cities. So over here, what I've taken is basically a snapshot of the 10 worst cities. However, in the book, we have got all the 56 lined up. So if you look at it, Dhanbad, in Dhanbad, it's 27.57. In Bhubaneswar, it's 67.05. So these are the important cities. Ranchi is around 73%. So we also can look at, and clean fuel is also a very big source of pollution and deaths because of that. It leads to deaths because of that. So indoor pollution, one of the biggest sources is using unclean fuel for cooking. Then we've also looked at green cover in these cities. And so India's target is to increase the green cover within cities to around 48% of their geographical area by 2030. We found that in 35 cities, the area under green cover was less than 25%. And in these 35 cities, 16 were capital cities. So it basically gives you an idea of the way we are basically urbanizing. Again, here's a snapshot of, I think, the 15 worst cities in terms of green cover. So in Kochi, in Agartala, it's basically less than 1%. In Trivandrum, it's less than 1%, the green cover. In Vijayawada and all, it's around 6% of the total geographical area is under green cover. So this is another aspect of how we are basically destroying the environment around us. Then we move on to the next one about, and this is a very critical problem. This is the problem of poor waste management. In the book, we have talked about different aspects of waste management. Over here, we are just talking about two of them, two of them. So the first is about hazardous waste. Hazardous waste, so basically there are these industries called hazardous waste generating industries in the country. It is an industrial pollution that we're talking about. And this is basically the most, the worst form of waste that comes out of the industry. So basically we're talking about the worst form of the waste that is coming out of these industries. So hazardous waste industries. So we've looked at 2019-20, the registry that exists, and 2021. So if you look at it both, so we had around 69,000 such industries in 2019-20, which has gone up to 76,000 in 2019-20. So it's a substantial increase in just in 2020-21, a substantial increase in just 1 year. We also look at over here the amount of waste that these industries are actually generating. Earlier it was around 8.78 million tons per annum, which has gone up to 9.24 million tons per annum. And we have also looked at how we are actually handling it. So it actually adds up to, these numbers do not add up to 9.24. So it basically means a lot of this hazardous waste is not being managed properly as well. So one problem is hazardous waste that we're looking at today. This other problem is plastics waste. So this is an analysis that has been done by CAC. So over here, what we've looked at is the amount of plastic waste that is being generated in the country, how much of it is actually being recycled or burnt, or just or we have no idea about what is happening with it. So over here, if you look at it, the numbers that we've been able to come up with is around 12% of the total plastic waste that the country is generating is actually getting recycled. That's like a minuscule percentage in terms of what we're generating right now. And 20% of the plastic waste that we've generated in 2019-20 was actually burned. And so basically, we're talking about 32% of the plastic waste is what we know what has happened to it. The remaining 70 or 68 odd percent, we have no idea what happens to that waste. And our guess is that it ends up in different forms of in terms of unsanitary landfills. So it is basically being managed in a way it shouldn't. And the results of which we are already aware of. So we've got microplastics and plastics in absolutely everywhere we go. And we know how it chokes the environment and it chokes biodiversity around it. So this is an analysis that CAC has done. So over here, what you see is only a snapshot of the 5 or I think the 10 worst cities in terms of plastic but in the book we have the entire list. I think it's basically we've talked about the estimated plastic generation that is happening. That's the blue, and basically the green is how much of it is being recycled, and the gray or the dark blue is basically how much of it is being burned. So if you look at it in Kerala, out of the 131,400 tons of plastic that was generated in 2019-20, only 1,000. So out of 131, only 1 is basically being recycled. So that is basically the ratio at which it is operating. In Haryana, it is similarly very low. So out of the 147,000 tons that was generated, plastic waste that was generated in 2019-20, 19,000 was recycled, 29,000 was burned, and the remaining, we have no idea where it is. So basically the government has little idea about what is happening with it. So this is basically how we're moving, and similar numbers can also be seen in terms of household waste that is being generated, segregation so waste management is basically a major challenge that we've realized exists in the country, and we've got numbers for that as well in this book. The other thing that we were able to do, and this is something that Kiran and we've been trying to do for a while. So we also tried to analyze the data quality, or the gaps within the data sets that the government is coming up with. So we were able to look at least 4 or 5 different data sets that we have used in this entire book, government data sets. And we were trying to analyze what kind of gaps exist. So this time we've been able to actually put some of them in some of the fact sheets. So I'll just show it to you. So starting with the hazardous waste that we just talked about, the hazardous waste industries. So on the one hand, we saw that the number of hazardous waste industries is going up, and also the quantum of waste that they're generating is also going up. The other part of the story is very interesting, that so by law, all of these industries, they have to every year say what kind of waste they are generating, the amount of waste that they're generating, and how they are actually processing it and how they're disposing it of. So it is a mandatory thing that they have to do. But the government of India in 2019-20, I think, in 2019-20, that was a year for which this report was talking about. Out of the 76,000 hazardous waste generating units that are there in India, only 48,000 were giving this information. That basically means around 23,000 hazarding waste generating units. So you have to keep in mind, these are like the worst form of industries in terms of the waste that they're generating. So around 22,000 units are not even giving their waste generation numbers. So over here, we and we also realized that Bihar and Mizoram, so the processes, these industries have to give the information to the state pollution control boards, and the state pollution control board has to give the information to the central pollution control board, and then the numbers come up in the public domain. So if you look at it over here, we've looked at some of the states. So we have a list of all the states and how they're performing. So we found out that in Manipur, so if you look at it, I'll just quickly tell you what this is. The bubbles that you see, the blue bubbles on the left, this is basically the percentage of the industries that are actually furnishing the information. So in Manipur, only 0.84% of the industries are giving the information of how much waste they're generating, hazardous waste they're generating. In Kerala, it is around 39.77%. In Delhi, it is around 52.76%. In Goa, it is around 48.9. So we've got an entire list of all these states over there in the book as well. So what we're saying is we have got only limited amount of information that we're dealing with to come up with this quantum of the problem. Another data gap that we found was in space of e-waste or electronic waste. So the government data that is being released right now does not even make sense. It's all jumbled up is what we could come up with. So this is the table that we found from different government sources. So if you look at it, this is basically the capacity to handle e-waste in different states. So if you look at it, in Andhra Pradesh, it says that there is one authorized e-waste collection center. And surprisingly, the capacity of that authorized e-waste collection center is 0. It just doesn't make sense. And the quantity it has received is 3.48 tons of e-waste. Similarly, if you look at it in West Bengal, it also has one collection center, and the capacity is 180,000 tons. So all of this basically made little sense. If you look at it, so out of the 182,000, if you were to believe what the government data suggests, India has a capacity of treating e-waste of 182,000 tons every year. Out of that, I think around roughly 96% exists only in West Bengal. Clearly shows that there is a problem with the numbers over here as well. The last slide that I would show, and this is something that is of extremely importance to us, is the fact that sustainable development goals. So India has been monitoring it, and it has been doing a very good job at it. We are not criticizing the government at the way they have gone about. They made a lot of improvements in the way they have actually gone about looking at the SDG numbers. But what we found was that there is a lot of data gaps in that as well. So we'll just talk about that, just the data gaps. No, we're not talking about the performance of different states in SDGs. We have talked about that in the book, but over here, we're just looking at the data gaps. So just to put things into perspective, in India, we've got something called a National Indicator Framework. That is basically a body which comes up with different indicators that should be monitored under SDGs. So in India, there have been, so this framework has been revised. So it I think came out, I don't remember which year it was, but it has subsequently been revised twice. So right now, we have looked at what are the indicators they think should be monitored. And what you have in blue is basically the number of indicators that are actually being monitored in India by Niti Aayog and different government agencies. So if you look at it, India is currently monitoring only 39% of the 295 indicators that it thinks it should monitor. So the National Indicator Framework says that there are 295 indicators that India should monitor for if it wants to monitor SDGs properly. In actual sense, we are only monitoring 39% of it. So what it happens in a granular level is basically, if you look at individual, so if you talk about SDG 8, which basically deals with economic growth, inclusive economic and sustained economic growth and productive employment. Over there, according to the framework, there are 41 indicators. But in actuality, we are basically looking at 9 of them. So we are basically moving ahead with 9 of them. I think it's 26 indicators that are there, and we are monitoring only 9 of them. So it is silent on important indicators. So some of the indicators that have not been handled or looked at in that is basically the growth of small and medium-sized industries. So that is one of the indicators that India should monitor. That is what the framework says. However, India is not monitoring that information. So at the rate at which MSMEs are actually coming up, and especially in this context where the government has been pushing entrepreneurs and has been pushing small setups, this is an extremely important parameter to look at. Similarly, if you look at SDG 3, which talks about health, so good health and well-being, there are 41 indicators underneath that. And out of that, only 10 are being monitored right now. So this is another cause for concern that exists and that we have been able to show in this book. So this is basically a broad snapshot of what all we have done in this book. I would really urge each one of you to go through it, buy this. I would request each one of you to go onto the CAC store and buy a copy. It's a very reasonably priced book, and we've got some 39 different fact sheets on this. And you can actually have a snapshot or an overview of how environment in India and climate change and different aspects of it has actually moved over the past 1 year, from last year to this year. I'll just stop my presentation over here. Thanks a lot for bearing. Shubhanu, over to you.
Right. Thank you so much, Rajit. I'm afraid we are reaching the time limit on even today, but we do have time for a couple of questions, perhaps. So let me quickly go through the question and answer box, and let me see. So Mr. Prabhakar Mahashabde has asked that, can you elaborate? I think this is addressed to Kiran. Can you elaborate, what do you mean by 40 to 65% of forests in India will become climate hotspots by 2050 and 2085? Do we have any specifics on that, Kiran?
Yes, the fact sheet has the numbers in terms of hectares of forest land that will be affected by that. So we have that number in the fact sheet.
So what has been looked at it? So basically, there are 2 projections that have been looked at: RCP 4.5 and RCP 8.5. RCP 4.5 is an ambitious projection. These are basically IPCC's projections. This is exactly where the world should, or India should, move. 8.5 is basically the way we are moving ahead if we go ahead. And we have basically looked at 2030, how much of forest area would become a climate hotspot, which basically means frequency or vulnerability to extreme weather events will go up. So forest fires would go up substantially, biodiversity loss would happen at a faster rate. Then again in 2050, we have looked at it from these 2 RCP situations. And again in 2085, we've looked at it. So that is how we've come up with the numbers.
Right. Thank you. There is also Mr. Swaminathan, T. Swaminathan, who is asking whether the soil analysis is a time average data, because he says it could be depending on cropping pattern as well. Any comments on that?
So we have used the government data. We have not checked this aspect, but this is the standardized data that they come up with.
This is the latest figures put out by the government on their soil health portal. So these are the latest numbers available as per
soil health card scheme. Yep. Yes. So we are not aware of this information, but this is what the government has pushed out. So we are assuming it has been factored in.
Right. Thank you. Okay. Oh, Richard is here. Mr. Richard Mahapatro, Managing Editor of Down to Earth and the man driving this entire enterprise. Thank you, Richard, for finally managing to connect. I believe there was some kind of network issue. Can I address one question to you? Quick question, Richard. There is Devarati Rudro, who's asking what steps India should take to specifically address the issue of migration due to climate change. Yeah, Down to Earth has done a lot of work on this, and CSE also has been following this. Would you like to comment on this?
Okay, I think very broadly, India doesn't have policy of resettlement due to, climate-induced or sea level rise, erosion of coast or river coast. We actually resettle and rehabilitate in case of land takeover or severe, disasters. So we don't have a policy per se. But if you look at it, there are states, those who are actually have started framing policies for this. For example, Uttarakhand. Uttarakhand has a disaster rehabilitation program. You can broadly, link it to the climate change and things. So where actually people demand and they rehabilitate disaster prone areas, particularly extreme weather events and the landslides prone areas. And that is picked up. Similarly, if you come to the coastal states of Odisha, then also West Bengal, you have green shoots of new policies being spoken about in terms of actually settlement and resettlement. And close to 20 villages in the Odisha coast are being rehabilitated now. Due to the sea erosions, their villages are completely 3 kilometers inside the sea now, and it's still increasing. So you can say that those are the first cases of where the rehabilitation is taking place. And slowly it's actually the policy is taking shape.
Thank you. I can see that we have crossed 1 p.m. Let me now take the opportunity to close this interaction. Thank you both presenters, Rajit and Kiran. I understand and I can see some of the comments also. Quite a grim, depressing and sort of a grim picture we have painted, I would say. But as we all know, numbers, if put forth honestly and truthfully, do not lie. And as we mark 50 years of the Stockholm Earth Summit this week, and prepare to touch on another World Environment Day on June 5th, we need to ask ourselves, according to me, where we are really headed. I'm going to leave you with that thought. Thank you so much for being with us today. I hope the presentations and what Ms. Narayan also said earlier ahead have given you enough to kind of mull over and have kindled your interest, so to speak. Thank you once again for taking the time out today to be with us. You can buy the report from the CSE store on our website. Sukanya has shared the link on the chat box. For journalists, my friends from the media who have joined us here today, let me tell you, we are sending out a press release just now. The press release is also there on the CSE website for any of you who want to take a look at it, perhaps. And we will be sending out more releases based on the report every day till June 5th. Till then, have a good day, all of you. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you.